So one of the things that you mentioned was the memory. And so the memory is still there,
Right.
but the reactivity to the memory has changed.
Exactly.
It didn't really change their experience of life. It was still there, but...
That's right. That's right. It's how they respond to it. So these areas that are set up, these emotional areas of the brain that respond to these very traumatic, anxiety-provoking kinds of situations, no longer responded in the same way that they had been doing. But yes, I mean, certainly the evidence shows that there's still the reaction to the memory. I mean, there's still a memory there, but they're no longer responding to it. The difference between what you see when people have these very distressing recollections is that they do, as you said, intrude upon kind of our normal way of thinking. Now, we looked at these individuals clinically, and now they no longer report that kind of problem. So after the intervention with the neuroemotional technique, so that to me is very, again, is another part of that which is very exciting and very interesting to see. And when you start to think a little bit about the neuroscience of all of this, so we have memory areas, we have emotional areas of the brain, and in general, they're connected to each other for obvious reasons. I mean, we should want to remember things that are emotionally important to us. So we remember our wedding day. We remember when somebody important dies or something. We remember 9/11. We kind of remember what was happening on those days because they were very emotionally salient. And that's part of why a memory gets written into the brain the way that it does. But then as we recall memories, there's that flip side then of, well, when we recall it, does it evoke the same kind of emotion? And sometimes it does, and again, to some degree it's supposed to, because our brain is telling us this is something that may be good or may be bad, but it's something that we have to pay attention to. So if there was something really bad that happened, if we remember a car accident that we were in and it evokes a strong memory, well, maybe we drive a little bit more carefully through that intersection and hopefully it protects us in the future. So there's a good element to it, but when it becomes excessive, when it becomes something that the person isn't able to control, when it intrudes on their normal way of thinking, when it keeps them up at night, then it becomes too excessive. And that's because every time the emotion is triggered, every time the memory is triggered, you get an excessive emotion, and sometimes it becomes too emotional too. Sometimes it's overly emotional. One big part was this initial approach at looking at the imaging. So that's piece number one, if you will. You had mentioned the genomics, another important element of that. It's very consistent with what we've seen on the brain imaging. So, for example, what's been happening is that in the genomics, what it's basically looking at are how it's not so our genes don't change, but how different genes are expressed and utilized change. Mm-hmm. And before and after the neuroemotional technique program, people were their genetic expression changed so that genes that were more related to stressors, anxiety, very strong emotional responses, those actually shifted to being less active or less expressed after the neuroemotional technique. So that starts to, again, we're showing that not only is this something that we're seeing going on in the brain itself, but we're seeing it happening really in the body as well. And of course, the most important part of it is how it's expressed clinically, how the person feels, and which is kind of an interesting thing, because as important as a brain scan may be at being able to show
Sure.
what's happening, it's ultimately what the person feels. And to me, actually, in many ways, the most rewarding part of that study was hearing these people say, yeah, I feel fine after hearing that horrible.
The clinician in you comes out.
It does come out, and that is the most important thing. And that to me is what was very almost as exciting, if not more exciting, than all the physiological measures. But the physiological measures help to validate what that feeling is and demonstrate it to the rest of the medical community, the rest of the psychological community, that there's really a physiological basis for what's going on.
Dr. Newberg, why is this research important?
Well, I think it's important because it really does, it shows the importance of what the neuroemotional technique can do. It shows how effective it can be, and it does provide a physiological basis. And it is, it is this interesting balance, like you said, between the clinician and me and the neuroscientist. And the beauty of neuroscience, especially with the beauty of neuroimaging, is that there's a picture, and a picture does paint 1,000 words. So if I were to go to my colleagues in psychiatry, for example, I could show them all the clinical data. I could show them clinical data on thousands of people that they all feel better, and that will be impressive to them. But if I can show them the brain scan before, and this is what's happening to it, and then here's what their brain does after, then suddenly in their minds they say, oh, something really happened, not only clinically, but something really happened physiologically. And I think that that does kind of carry the day a lot of times. And even, when you talk about presenting information to people, what you see in the words is never as amazing and never has the impact that it can have if you can show a picture along with it. And we all know that, and that's why the pictures can really be very, very helpful. And I think it will go a long way to help to validate how and why the neuroemotional technique works. And as we've discussed, I think it also sets us up for thinking about future studies that can look at not just what's going on in the brain, but what's going on in the body as well. And this is also part of how science proceeds. I mean, it'd be great to say, well, let's do the ultimate study and study thousands of people and spend millions and millions of dollars and do all kinds of scans and things like that. And someday we might be able to get to that. But ultimately, science does proceed very slowly. So we start with the first thing and we show, okay, in a nice size study, we see this effect. Now we can take that and say, all right, now we can apply it to other populations. We can look at other physiological measures and really try to describe it as thoroughly and as fully as possible so that people understand what's really happening with it and can appreciate it.